Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. One of the scariest things that we can prepare for is an EMP. If one were to happen, it would devastate our electrical grid and anything connected to it. And then even smaller devices that aren't directly connected to the grid could be damaged, especially if they have solid-state electronics. And the effects would go far beyond the lights going out and our cell phones not working. Other vital infrastructure, including water treatment and delivery systems and natural gas utilities, would be affected as well, along with the logistics systems that transport things like food and fuel across the country and the world. Fortunately, preparing for an EMP involves many of the same things we should already be doing as preppers. Basics like food, water, and medication are all good to have regardless of the situation. But the way an EMP would differ from other long-term widespread disasters is that technology would be particularly vulnerable. And to deal with that, you want to stockpile certain things to help you remain functional in that kind of situation. And while many kinds of technology would likely be destroyed by an EMP, many people would be surprised to learn that many electronics could actually survive one. Vintage electronics that use vacuum tubes would probably fare much better than modern electronics that use semiconductors, but even some simple modern production devices would probably be okay. For example, devices like this fan would probably be okay because really, it's just a bunch of wires with a motor attached to it. There's not really any solid state circuitry involved in this. Even the switch is just your normal 3-position switch. It doesn't have a button that you use to cycle between settings. So this would probably be okay. And then also any flashlights like this that just use a simple switch and then have these old style incandescent bulbs. Those incandescent bulbs are going to be a lot less vulnerable to an EMP than an LED would, because an LED is basically circuitry. And then also the switch isn't going to have any circuitry in it either. Now you will need batteries to keep things like fans and flashlights running, but fortunately most batteries would survive an EMP, and that includes basic alkaline batteries and their rechargeable variants. So that means that if you're able to protect even a small solar generator, some solar panels, and a battery charger, you should be able to keep those devices running indefinitely, but I would recommend storing them without batteries just to be on the safe side. Another EMP-proof item that you can stockpile is Faraday bags. In an earlier video, I showed how to make Faraday cages out of common household materials, but those do have some drawbacks. The main one being that the items inside may be difficult to access. So those are more well suited for longer term storage of items that you don't use very often or larger items. Faraday bags, on the other hand, are good for smaller devices that you want to protect but you still want to use regularly. I have a few Faraday bags here from GoDark that they sent me. I like to thank them for sending those and for sponsoring this video. But that being said, I approached them and asked for these because I thought that bags like this would be very useful in this sort of situation. The first one that they sent me is a small bag designed to protect devices like cell phones. And while the cell phone isn't something that a lot of people are going to be too concerned about following an EMP, it is a good size for other small devices like Geiger counters. And those are important since an EMP would likely precede a nuclear strike, and if you survive the initial exchange, having the ability to measure radiation could be a lifesaver. But one way that you could use this daily is to store your car keys. Car thieves are becoming much more sophisticated, and now it's possible for them to steal your car by boosting the signal from your car's key fob. This is a problem with vehicles that have keyless ignition and passive entry systems, both of which are becoming more common. So to protect my truck, which has both of those, I go through some sort of weird OCD procedure where I make sure it's locked again for the upteen dozenth time, and then I'll just drop it in the Faraday bag, close it up, and that'll block the radio signal that key fob emits, thus preventing anybody from hijacking and being able to get into the truck or drive it off. The next bag that they sent me is a 10-liter dry bag that'll shield your devices from an EMP along with water damage. And I think something like this would be very useful in a bug-out bag. You could keep any electronics in there that you'd want to have with you, like flashlights, headlamps, radios, and USB battery banks. That way, if an EMP happened, all of your devices that you have inside of here would be protected from that, and it'd also be protected from rain if you had to travel through that, or if your bag got wet for some other reason. But since it's waterproof, it could also be good for other things that you don't want to get wet that aren't electronic, like maybe a gas mask. The third bag that they sent me is a laptop sleeve, but because of its size, it can hold a lot more than just laptops. Something like this would be good to keep larger items in, like mobile radios, and you could also use it to store some portable solar panels. Now, when I say that, I'm talking about the small, like backpacking solar panels. You'd need to measure them to make sure that they could fit inside of here, but if you put that in here along with a few battery banks, you would basically have yourself a small portable solar generator protected inside of here. And there's a couple of things about these bags that I really like compared to other Faraday bags that I own. First off is how they close. There's just this little elastic band here that loops over the logo on the front. And I did not think I would like that at first, but I actually do because it's a lot faster and quieter than having the entire top closed with Velcro, because as you can see, takes a lot longer to get into, it's a lot louder, and that can be a big problem if I'm needing to get to my keys while everybody else in the house is asleep. Another thing that I like about the Go Dark bags is that they have a felt liner inside of them. And that felt liner, it protects the conductive cloth inside of the bag from, like, if you keep putting your keys in and out of it day after day, prevents it from getting worn out. And then also it kind of puts a barrier between that cloth and certain devices like your cell phone, so that that conductive cloth doesn't activate certain features while it's in the bag. But even if you are able to protect some of your technology, it's also a good idea to stockpile some old school tech as well. Things like oil lamps and hurricane lanterns don't have any electronic components that could become damaged, and they were used long before electric lights were invented. However, after using them for a few different things, I've started to prefer candle lanterns instead. Larger candle lanterns like this one that have multiple candles actually produce a similar amount of light and heat as a lot of oil-based lanterns and lamps, but with much less of an odor. When I tested one versus a dedicated cooking hurricane lantern, the candle lantern actually did a much better job heating food than the hurricane lantern did. But if you plan on using one or more of these long-term, I would recommend investing in ways to make your own candles, because if you just try to stockpile a ton of these from the manufacturer, it's going to get incredibly expensive. Propane and white gas lanterns are much brighter than candles and oil lanterns, but between the two, I would go with a white gas lantern for longer term situations like an EMP. Just be sure to stockpile plenty of mantles and fuel, but that being said, anything that has a man-made fuel source is going to eventually run out if a situation lasts long enough. Another kind of old school tech that you should stockpile is hand tools. While modern power tools would be incredibly useful during a disaster, many of them would be vulnerable to an EMP. Even simple corded tools could be affected due to the switches that they use. But having basic things like hammers, screwdrivers, and wrenches would help you in everyday life, but also allow you to do a lot of things after a disaster. When it comes to hammers, of course, your little just 16-ounce claw hammer is going to be a good choice for just general use, but if you're going to be involved in some bigger tasks, you might want to get a larger framing hammer. They're better for driving longer screws, and if you're doing any demo work, the rip claw on the back is very useful for that. For screwdrivers, you could just get a bunch of fixed blade screwdrivers, but I really do prefer the bit sets for most cases. Every once in a while, you know, I'll use just a normal, just dedicated Phillips driver, but most of the time if I use a flathead, just dedicated screwdriver, it's for prying something. Then different kinds of wrenches, like here I have an adjustable wrench here. Then here I have some channel locks also. But for pliers, I'd recommend getting some VAM pliers. These are nice because they have teeth on the end, so they're very good for grabbing hold to fasteners, especially things like screws that have stripped out heads on them. Now you could take it a step further. You could get some additional things to help you do things like drill holes. And for something like this, these old style egg beater drills are very useful for that. Just as a general rule, the bigger ones will be able to drill some bigger holes, but if you need to do something wide and deep, then a brace and bit is going to be what you want. Now, Yankee screwdrivers, they're actually pretty cool. They're kind of a like a drill and ratcheting screwdriver all in one, but if you're going to get one of these, I would recommend getting an adapter that'll allow you to use modern hex style bits, because otherwise you're going to have to get proprietary bits for them, and those can get expensive and they're a little hard to find. But kind of a good substitute for that, although it can't drill, is just a normal ratcheting screwdriver, but if you get one of these, get a good one because they do tend to break down fairly regularly. Then you may also want to pick up some manual kitchen tools. Like this is an old grinder that I found in my grandma's house when she was downsizing. And this thing probably is at least a couple of decades older than I am, but it looks brand new. A lot of this stuff was built really well. Actual egg beaters will allow you to mix things much faster than just using a whisk, and manual grain mills can be used to process wheat and corn into flour and cornmeal. Then if you've stored canned goods, be sure to pick up a few can openers. These can be full-size hand crank models, those found on multi-tools, or even military-style keychain can openers. Then, since refrigerators won't be working after an EMP, you should stockpile things that'll allow you to preserve food. Having a good stock of canning supplies will allow you to preserve fruits, vegetables, and even meat for long periods of time. But when you're selecting a canner, be sure to get one that's safe to use over a wood fire because you could eventually run out of things like butane and propane if we're dealing with a longer term situation. Then also have plenty of jars, lids, and rings. But one area that a lot of preppers overlook is laundry. Picking up a washboard like this and a basin will allow you to do laundry the old-fashioned way. You would need to pick up some bar soap like this for that though. And then also having other things like a clothesline would be essential, and if you can afford it, getting a manual clothes wringer would be nice as well. Then another area to consider is transportation. Cars probably aren't going to be working. Even if they survive the initial EMP, eventually fuel's going to run out and the places that process those fuels aren't going to be up and running anytime soon. So having a bicycle would be good. And then also be sure to have spare parts for your bicycle to keep it running long term. Then also maybe consider getting some utility carts to haul things around. Another EMP-proof item that you should stockpile is printed resources. And on this channel, we've talked about books a lot. I've done dedicated videos on books. I've listed books in other videos. So we're not going to cover those too much, but just having some resources like the Encyclopedia of Country Living, Survival Medicine Handbook, SAS Survival Guide, those are all just good general resources to have. But also think about resources that you can print yourself. Maps are an example of that. You can go on to the USGS website and print out your own topo maps. Of course, you can order them from there as well, but this is one that I just downloaded for free, printed out, and then I laminated it because I figured that a map might be something that you need to take with you. Laminating it will protect it from getting all crinkled up, also protect it from moisture, but also think about other things that you could print off as well. Maybe it's a full PDF of something like a military survival guide, or just maybe you found a website with some useful information. Just print that particular article or whatever it may be off and then file it away in a binder. The next group of EMP-proof items that you should stockpile is survival tools. Axes and knives are always good to have around, and I like to have a mix of budget and nicer options to fill out my different kits. So for my mainline kits and then also just regular use around the house, I like Becker knives. This is the BK2 I keep in my get home bag. Have a BK16, I really like that one, and then my BK21 gets used a lot around the house for yard work and stuff. I mean, it was designed for like camping tasks, but it can also tear branches up if I need to break them down to shove them in a trash bag. But then also have some cheaper options, like I keep this Mora in the kitchen, and then for my truck I have a Fiskars hatchet and a Mora Craftline Basic. Then most things that you would stockpile for hunting or defense are EMP proof as well, with the exception of some electronic optics. So if you're using those, especially on a long gun, I'd recommend having some sort of backup iron sight. Like mine, it's just fixed in place all the time. I don't even have to flip anything up to access it. Another group of survival tools that you can stockpile for an EMP are cooking tools. Things like rocket stoves and Kelly kettles are excellent for this since they use natural materials like sticks and pine cones. Now, I'm not saying that you want to stockpile like 15 rocket stoves, but you do want to have several different things that you can use to cook in different kinds of situations. But if you're using different wood fire-based cooking methods, then be sure to have some cast iron cookware. Cast iron is going to hold up much better to that sort of use than other kinds of cookware, and it's also naturally anti-stick. At a minimum, I would recommend having a skillet, Dutch oven, and griddle to cover as many cooking tasks as possible. Alcohol stoves are good for smaller tasks, and while yes, you will eventually run out of things like denatured alcohol or isopropyl alcohol, you gotta remember that alcohol really is not that difficult to make. watch the Discovery Channel, and I'm sure that even in a long-term collapse situation, there would be plenty of that being manufactured. Then you also need ways to purify water long-term. Sawyer filters will remove most contaminants, but not viruses and chemicals. Berkey filters were considered the benchmark for years, but they're currently involved in a lawsuit, so you can't pick up any new black Berkey filtering elements. But for my family's water purification plan, I prefer to use multiple methods to take care of as many contaminants as possible, and that would be good for any long-term disaster, including an EMP. You can see my family's full water purification plan by clicking here, or if you want to learn more about how to survive an EMP, then click here. And also, guys, there's probably a lot of other things people would want to stockpile, so be sure to check out my ultimate stockpile checklist. Once again, I'd like to thank GoDark for sponsoring this video. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.